From Studio 3B in Rockefeller Center, here again is Stone Phillips.
You see them everywhere these days, those very popular, very expensive four-wheel drive sport utility vehicles. They've got a reputation for being rugged. But as Lee Thompson showed us earlier this year, a few of them weren't even tough enough to stand up to a 5-mile-per-hour fender bender. Tonight, a new test for four-wheel drives, and this time it's not just your bumper or your pride at stake. Here's Lee Thompson.
We want to compare cars because we want to see fewer deaths, fewer serious injuries, lower insurance premiums.
You are behind the scenes.
Left. You're left.
At one of the most modern automobile crash test facilities in the world.
That's right on the money.
It's called the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, funded by some of the biggest auto insurance companies in the nation. The Institute has been doing crash testing since 1969. Its findings even used by some car companies in their advertising. It's a place where lifelike dummies are tested and retested before they're finally loaded in place behind the wheel. The goal, it says, is to try to find out which cars will do the best job of protecting you in an accident. But automakers question whether the insurance industry should be doing testing at all, charging it's really concerned about reducing claims regardless of what it adds to the cost of a new car. Brian O'Neill heads up the Insurance Institute.
The manufacturers are never going to compare their cars. They don't like their cars being compared. They would just be content to sit back and say, we have to meet a government standard, we're all meeting the government standards.
That's why O'Neill decided to crash test some of the hottest selling vehicles in America, four-wheel drive sport utilities, including the Ford Explorer, the Jeep Grand Cherokee, the Toyota 4Runner, and 3 others, a mix of foreign and domestic models from General Motors, Isuzu, even Land Rover. Every one of the four-wheel drives being tested does meet the U.S. government standards for auto safety. The question is, how will they do in a test the government does not perform?
This is the government's crash test.
This is the way the government tests cars, straight on into a wall. It's a good way to test airbags and seat belts. The trouble is, many real-world accidents don't happen that way.
Very few people run into a solid brick wall. Even if they run into a solid object, it's normally only part of the vehicle.
Go to any junkyard and you'll see what he means. So instead of crashing cars into a flat wall like the government does, the Insurance Institute decided to do a new test. It's called an offset because the car hits off-center. The force of the crash concentrated on just one side.
When only part of the front end of the vehicle hits an object, whether it's a tree or a bridge abutment, you get the kinds of forces that are showing up in this test.
And the results can be dramatically different. Remember that car in the government test? This is what happened to the same model car last year in the Institute's test.
All of the cars are doing well in the government test now, but they're not all doing well in this test.
Over the years, better car designs have made a difference. Seatbelts and airbags are protecting the head and the chest, saving more lives than ever. But now, some of the people who live are being rushed to the hospital with crippling leg injuries.
And between his knee and his hip joint, his thigh bone was fractured in several places.
So you might wonder why the government doesn't do offset testing. We asked the government's top auto safety official that last year.
We applaud the Insurance Institute for doing this sort of test. We think it's an important test. We just don't have the money right now to do that.
So how will the four-wheel drives do in this year's offset test? In the commercials, they're portrayed as rough and rugged.
And maneuvering outdoors.
But how well will they protect you in a 40-mile-an-hour accident? To find out, the Institute will be crashing each one into this barrier. Before each test, the dummies are precisely positioned. A special grease paint is applied, different colors for different parts of the body.
This way we can tell where shin impact was.
A computer will record the forces on the dummy's head, chest, and legs, more than 10,000 readings every second. The Institute bought the brand new four-wheel drives right off dealers' lots. The Institute also decided how the cars were chosen, tested, and evaluated.
3, 2, 1.
The car being tested, the 1996 Toyota 4Runner.
It's hard to tell, those feet. Obviously some intrusion.
There's damage, but most of it stops before it reaches the driver. You'll see throughout our report what happens with the help of the Institute's slow-motion cameras.
The airbag deploys, the dummy goes in to the airbag, comes back. The damage is confined to the front end of the vehicle. This is what we want.
The computer analysis of the dummy shows a possible injury, perhaps a broken leg, but the Institute decided the risk is not high. This is the Land Rover Discovery.
It might have some problems around the left ankle.
On the slow-motion film, you can see the damage. On the dummy, there's a chance of a broken leg, but once again, it's not high. Now, the Ford Explorer. Watch carefully.
You see this mark here? This pink here is from this side of the dummy's head.
The Explorer does a good job protecting the dummy's legs, but the slow-motion film shows the driver's door popping open.
As the door comes open, that allows the body to come out, and as the dummy is going back in, his head strikes the pillar. That wasn't a high force, but it was a troubling impact.
Take a look at the Jeep Grand Cherokee.
There were very bad injury measures on both legs for this dummy.
Part of the footwell in the Jeep is driven back 10 inches.
There was a high risk of significant injury, fractures to both legs in this crash.
This is the new Isuzu Rodeo. It's also sold as the Honda Passport.
Well, this is not good. I mean, this is a lot of damage. Major intrusion then in the foot area.
Inside the Isuzu, the footrest has been driven back 15 inches, the most of any.
Let's see what happened to the leg.
And at the computer, the dummy readings are not good. As you watch the slow motion, remember the Isuzu is traveling the same speed as the others, 40 miles an hour.
Look at how much damage there is. It's collapsing. It's actually totally collapsing.
How badly is this dummy hurt?
At a minimum, very serious leg injuries, fractures, probably multiple fractures.
And there's another test. This is the Chevy Blazer.
It looks pretty bad. There's a lot of intrusion in the footwell area.
The footrest has been driven back 13 inches. But in a test where broken legs are usually the most serious injuries, there is concern about this dummy's head.
Major problems in this test. You will see how much violent movement there is. The dummy's actually looking back up at you.
Remember, you're watching this car at 40 miles an hour.
The dummy goes into the airbag, comes back, hits that window frame so hard there's a dent left. That is all happening because the structure around the dummy is collapsing.
Although the computer readings indicate no serious injuries to the chest or legs and no life-threatening injury to the head, O'Neill says the dummy's head hit hard enough to cause a concussion.
We have not seen bad head injury results like this vehicle in any of the other vehicles.
If you have never seen this before on another car or four-wheel drive vehicle, is it possible that it's just a fluke?
It's never a fluke in a crash test when a dummy records high measurements. The structural collapse of this vehicle will happen over and over again. It's a function of the design. The precise movement of the dummy may not be repeatable, but if you run this test over and over again, the structure will collapse in similar manners.
But automakers, citing this report for Congress, say one test may not be enough to really judge a car. The Insurance Institute counters that it tests the same way the government does, one test for each vehicle model. Every manufacturer declined to be interviewed, but they all wrote letters defending their four-wheel drive, saying the test was too fast. The results were misleading because they ignore real-world crash data. And they all say they have been working hard to improve safety. Ford even sent this video showing the Explorer in a similar but slower crash test where the door stayed closed. Ford says it's never popped open before in a test. Dateline asked General Motors to release any films of any offset tests it had done on the Blazer. GM declined, but sent this letter saying, it's important to consider a broad range of accident modes, not a single test. That redesigning cars to improve leg protection could have negative consequences for the protection of the head and chest. And that even in this test, the injury readings were all within the allowable government standards. GM also criticized the Insurance Institute for its, quote, stage crashes. And it criticized Dateline for helping the Institute to select, quote, the best camera angles to achieve a dramatic pictorial effect. In fact, before Dateline was invited to watch the tests, the Institute had already established its test procedure, including the number of cameras, their position, and what they would shoot. Only then did we set up our own cameras. The Institute invited not only Dateline, but manufacturers to observe, and met with them about test procedures and the results.
These tests, in my opinion, are misleading to the public because they don't relate to the real world.
George Parker represents the International Association of Automobile Manufacturers.
For injury, for damage, and for fatalities, these vehicles have a better record than other vehicles on the road.
Parker and the automakers point to the insurance industry's own statistics, which show overall four-wheel drives fare better than average in real-world accidents.
These are large, heavy vehicles. They're most likely crash partners, something lighter and smaller.
Most people think that if you have a rough, tough, heavy vehicle, that you'll be safer. True or false?
Only parts of that are true. Rough and tough do not equal safety.
The Institute agrees that in a head-on crash between two cars, a heavier vehicle usually does have an advantage. But O'Neill says these tests show that in some accidents, like hitting a tree or a concrete barrier, a heavy four-wheel drive may actually offer less protection.
Our top-rated passenger cars would fare better than this group of utility vehicles.
Even though these four-wheel drives are heavier.
Weight makes no difference when you're running into something rigid.
But the car makers say most accidents involve two vehicles colliding. Even so, the Insurance Institute wonders why car makers can't build four-wheel drives to protect passengers in both full frontal and offset tests. And why one four-wheel drive can look like this, while another one looks like this in the same test. Should the government require all vehicles to pass both tests, especially when the automakers have already proven they can build cars that do well? Last year, the Institute gave the Chevy Lumina, the Ford Taurus, and the Volvo 850 good ratings. But this year it says none of the four-wheel drives deserve high marks. Tomorrow, the Insurance Institute will release its rankings, factoring in how the four-wheel drives did in the offset test and how they performed in the government's full frontal test. The Insurance Institute rates three of them as acceptable: the Toyota 4Runner, the Land Rover Discovery, and the Ford Explorer. One is rated marginal, the Jeep Grand Cherokee. And the Institute rates these four-wheel drives as poor: the Isuzu Rodeo, also sold as the Honda Passport, and the Chevy Blazer, also sold as the GMC Jimmy and the Oldsmobile Bravada. The auto industry disputes those evaluations.
I think they ought to look at the real-world experience of these vehicles, which is very good. And knowing that, that's more important. There's thousands of crashes, millions of miles, millions of vehicles against 6 crash tests.
And this reminder, a point on which the insurance industry and the car companies agree. And every test, the injuries could have been much worse without seat belts and airbags.
The Insurance Institute says two other popular four-wheel drives, the Nissan Pathfinder and the Mitsubishi Montero, were totally redesigned for 1996 and hit the showrooms too late to be included in this round of crash tests. But the Institute does plan to test them later this year, and we'll tell you how they do here on Dateline.